Hey everybody, welcome to More Fun Comics, where it's not just fun, it's more fun. In 1966, artist Al Williamson, already an EC Comics sci-fi legend, got the call from King Features to helm their relaunch of Flash Gordon. Flash Gordon was created in 1934 by Alex Raymond in the Sunday sections of America's newspapers, and Raymond's lush and detailed visual style set an incredibly high standard. But I believe Williamson's take on Flash Gordon rivaled even Raymond in technique and style. Today we're going to take a look at King Comics Flash Gordon number 5, and if you value hunters and cool comic book cultural archivers, should be on the lookout for it. Hey everybody, welcome to More Fun Comics, where things are just more fun. Flash Gordon, to me, is the Michael Jordan of space adventurers. Created by Alex Raymond, first appeared in America's newspapers on Sunday Comics in 1934. The character proved to be extremely popular, including a movie serial, or several of them, featuring Buster Crabbe, which many consider to be one of the best movie serials ever made. There was also a fantastic 1980s movie, which is a cult movie by any standard right now. So the character remains culturally recognizable today. From 1952 to 1956, Al Williamson, along with frequent collaborators like Frank Frazetta and Roy Krinkle, were top contributors at EC Comics, especially on their extremely influential science fiction books like Weird Fantasy and Weird Science. Williamson continued his work in science fiction with various publishers, and in 1966 ended up on the King Features relaunch of Flash Gordon. Although switching publishers several times, the comic ran for 37 issues, with the last few being the comic adaptation of the 1980s movie, which is totally worth a rewatch if you haven't watched it. At the very least, you need to go and look at the trailer, and the trailer will motivate you. If you're not doing anything on a Saturday night, get a pizza, get some beer, watch the 1980s Flash Gordon. It's great. With rare exceptions, the quality of the comic series dropped notably through the 1970s. So for me, and my more fun comics mentality, which is always looking for kind of a sweet spot, it's the first 13 issues of this series which are the most interesting. The amazing quality of work in these issues from not only Williamson, but from other fellow EC legend Reed Crandall and Flash Gordon newspaper artist Mac Rayboy, who had his own legendary run on the character. Williamson's work with EC and on comics like Flash Gordon was a major influence on future masters like Bernie Wrightson and Michael Kaluta. In fact, thanks to Williamson, one of Kaluta's earliest comic works is issue number 18 of this Flash Gordon series. Current artists like Frank Cho, Steve Epting, Mark Schultz, and Dave Gibbons have all cited Williamson as a huge influence on their work. Williamson went on to make major contributions to Warren's eerie and creepy line, as well as being George Lucas's personal choice to draw the hugely popular Star Wars daily strips for its adaptation of Empire Strikes Back. He continued his work in comics until a few years before his death in 2010. This is a Silver Age comic with a popular character and an amazing creative team in Williamson and legendary writer Archie Goodwin. Is it worth adding to your More Fun Comics sweet spot selection? Can we even afford it? I don't know. Let's find out. At this comic book shop, we're more interested in getting a great comic book and getting great value. So we'll be focusing mostly on the mid-grade books between 4.0 and 7.0. Assuming a bell curve, these are the grades that are probably the most available in the wild. This sweet spot is where I believe you can find gems at a comic book shop, comic convention, or online. Still save a little bit of cash and build out that collection. It's always an interesting question, can we afford it? With Silver Age comics, it's often, they're often in many cases priced kind of way out of consideration, especially for the More Fun Comics sweet spot, which is we're just looking for value in books. We're willing to give up perfection for getting a great comic at a great price. So things like this come along and you wonder, is this something we can afford? Well, let's take a look at it because the pedigree's pretty good. It's a good character. Let's see how decent the comic is. I chose this one because it's just a great example of Al Williamson's art And as you can see here, it's a perfectly good example. Williamson, I think he only did like 3 or 4 issues. I know he did 1, and he did this one and 4, I believe. But the reason I mentioned that the first 13 issues are the great because there's other great artists on those other issues. So as I said, it's a nice thing to have. It brings up a kind of another interesting thing that's sort of fun to think about and another way to look at collecting, comic book collecting, and that's collecting by an artist, which is sometimes easier than collecting an entire series, which over the course of a series, the quality, as we'll see as we do more of these, becomes real inconsistent. And you're collecting like everything of a character, you're collecting everything in a linear way, so that you have the complete set. There's so many different ways to collect, but I tend to be a little bit more of collecting creators, especially guys like Al Williamson, but also Mac Rayboy did part of this comic run, and Reed Crandall did a couple of issues. And so that's why I say issue 1 through 13 are really kind of the cool ones to look for, in my opinion. Also, I'd add issue 18, which is, as we mentioned earlier, that early Kaluta. This is definitely a comic we're looking to fit right into the sweet spot. I don't want to pay a ton of money for these comics. As much as I love the character, I'm more interested in just having a great comic to read that I'm happy to own. So let's take a look at the issue within the context of a grade. We're trying to fit inside that sweet spot. So the first thing I always look for, and I would recommend or at least suggest as a possibility for you, is to always initially look at the eye appeal. A lot of times that's going to be what the entire book comes down to, unless there's some kind of major flaw on the inside. But for the most part, when you're really looking at a comic, as we've seen over and over again, the characteristics of the cover and the quality of the cover are often the determinant of the value, at least in a large way. So this one, let's see where this one kind of comes in. There's some interesting things about it. Let's take a closer look. So one of the things you're looking for right off the bat is the color, the richness of the color, see if it's not faded, the general kind of dinginess of the issue. And for the most part, this issue looks pretty clean, and the colors look real good, real sharp. So there's not a lot of flaws in the cover. So as you can see, the color looks pretty sharp on this one. And there's no creases. But if we get down to the corner here, we start seeing some other interesting things going on here. The edges look really good. And sharp, and the corners are pretty good, but we've got this kind of staining here. So it could be food that was on the book or something, but it's sort of, and since that's a white part of the book, it comes out real prominently, so you can see it all along the edge here. So that's a detracting factor of the cover. But as we keep looking for over the rest of the cover, again, the edges look real clean, the edges are sharp, the corners are good, the color looks good. So, and then here we see definitely going to have some issues with the spine, the blunted corner here, the spine creases, the creases that are breaking color, especially up here in the prominent corners. It looks like maybe it got hit against something up in the corner and kind of crunched to that corner. Because as you go down the side, the spine damage, there's some, just kind of major creases or minor creases that they do break color, but you got kind of a rough spine here. So, but once you get to down past the staple, it doesn't look too bad from that point on. So in order to figure out a grade, let's give it sort of a range that we can start working from. So I would say that this one, just looking at it, if I picked it up in a comic book shop and didn't take it out of the bag, I would look at it. I'd say it's somewhere between a 4 and a 6. So again, we're going to kind of drop it in the middle there and see if we can get a 5 out of this. So you get a great example right off the bat of what a quality artist Al Williamson was in his ability to draw jungles and strange characters and human faces. He was very exceptional, very realistic artist who characteristically had a lot of detail in his work. If you're not familiar with Flash Gordon, his eternal enemy is Ming the Merciless, who rules the planet Mongo. And most of his adventures, he wasn't a galactic guy that went all over the place. He did occasionally go other places. But for the most part, it was a battle between Earth and Mongo, which was always trying to take over Earth. So Flash was the person uniquely capable of dealing with Ming the Merciless. So here, all you young artists, is something interesting to look at. So this is a great example of cross-hatching and an interesting way to use it. You'll see a lot of guys like Wrightson and Kaluta and Williamson, obviously here, and other artists who use this technique to do kind of a mist, and the way it kind of works out, it's real interesting to see the straight cross-hatching going on up here with sort of the mist drawing in the background, and then the cross-hatching on the inside around her head actually takes more of a curved shape. So it's real interesting the way he shapes the mist. So if you've ever wondered how to draw smoke or mist, definitely check out Al Williamson's stuff. Can't go too far without commenting on the awesome outfit that Williamson gave Dale Arden in this particular issue. Very stylish. One of the great initiations into comic book nerddom is to have a letter published in a comic. Quite a thing of pride. And a lot of times you'll find guys that have gone on to work in comics at some popular level who were so into comics that they would write in. So this is an interesting advertisement. It actually indicates that there was at least some level of female readership to where they felt they were it's comfortable enough to run advertising for sewing patterns. So not to be misogynist or anything like that, but certainly within the context of 1966, you would safely say that the audience for this ad was decidedly female, which is an interesting choice. You'd never see anything like this in a Marvel or DC comic. And in fact, this comic also, as we'll see as we go forward, has a lot fewer more macho kind of ads. So I think the readership that we're seeing in this particular comic is obviously younger, and boys and girls, which is unusual in comics. So the Flash Gordon comics, like the Popeye comics we looked at a couple weeks ago, is actually told more in an episodic way, whereas one issue would actually include a number of stories as opposed to one long story. So this is just another story that's within the issue, but there's some really cool stuff about it, and really actually kind of shows how awesome Al Williamson was as a science fiction artist. Let me just show a few things. It's just a great sci-fi panel, real nice rocket, clean lines, sort of a dreamlike effect. Really what Al Williamson was really, really good at. This page is really good, gives a great sense of how Williamson was sort of very cinematic in his style. The medium shot cutting to a close-up, exterior shots, a wide-angle shot of a palace, and then also in instances like this where taking a point of view from a camera that would be elsewhere, looking down, these two panels, the camera would be looking down, and then it comes down to level, and then looking up at the end here with the shadowy effects. So it's just there was a great cinematographer on this comic. Look at this awesome thing. Look at this awesome sort of cubist, surreal thing with really interesting uses of grays, white, black, and then offset by some color in the background. Another thing Raymond really excelled with was his science fiction landscapes, as you can see in this particular shot. More space planes, and then also, which was a big thing of his in the EC comics, was the creatures that he created, which are like these pterodactyl things that are down here. So we might as well take a moment to look at the paper quality here. As we've gone through this, there hasn't been anything particularly noteworthy of on the pages. We haven't seen anything torn out, anything cut. The pages seem to be well trimmed, and we're not seeing a lot of little tears in them. So they're pretty clean. The standard that we use, which is an arbitrary one, admittedly, about how white the pages are, you can see that they're not too bad, actually. We'd call this probably like a light tan, a very light brown. So none of these pages, at least that we've seen up to this point, would detract from what we thought the initial judgment of the book. Again, another awesome Al Williamson landscape, sci-fi landscape, which was just over and over and over again, with this sort of dreamlike quality, and the composition and the coloring and everything about it is really very interesting. So again here, an interesting, great depth in it with planets in the skies, but the skies are dark. It's just an awesome sci-fi world, and one that Williamson is so good in doing. So an interesting way to market comics that you didn't see very often was these fun packs, where they'd actually pack 3 titles together into packs that you could buy on a counter display. That wasn't real common. You didn't see those very often, but they mixed up the issues every month. So that might have been a fun thing to do. And then, of course, another thing that you see, like the joke ads at the beginning of the comic here, we also see the 100 toy soldier sets, which were super popular back then because they were advertised, full-page advertisements on practically every comic. So clearly somebody was making money. But 100 soldiers for 125, these were the kind of things that you blew up with fireworks. You had to have plenty of them around in those days. Another common advertisement on comics was the fishing equipment for $12.95, which actually is a nice little rig here for $12.95 if that's what you actually got. But those ads ran very often as well, always full page. Well, we were hoping to get a 5.0 out of this. I'd be curious what you think the grade should be. Where would you put it? We'll take a look at what I think it's going to be after this brief interlude. Welcome to the Dollar Bin Deal or Discard section, a new section in More Fun Comics, where we'll look at stuff from the dollar bin. These are things that are interesting to look at, but you definitely should not pay more than $1 for. And perhaps one of the greatest entries, and certainly worthy of our initial foray into the dollar bin, is a Marvel Comics series called Spoof, which only lasted five or six issues. Notable thing about it was the issue number 1 came out in 1970, but number 2 didn't come out until 1972. So there wasn't a lot of demand for this particular series. The only really super notable thing about this series that makes it kind of interesting is the fact that there are a lot of cultural references. While this is probably the best part of the entire issue, it is interesting to note, and it makes it an interesting cover and definitely puts it in my category for worth $1, is just the real interesting number of people that are on this cover, with the Beatles themselves appearing at the inauguration of new President David Cassidy. But also attending is the Michael Jackson and the Jackson 5, the Osmonds, and at least Mick and I don't know, is that Keith back there? Ron Wood, yeah, they're in there. Elvis, of course, and I'm Tom Jones. I don't know who that is. So it's kind of interesting if you're a Beatles collector or a Jackson 5 collector or a Rolling Stones collector. Here you go. For one, don't pay more than $1 for this, but add it to your collection. Well, welcome back. Have you thought a little bit about what grade you'd give this book? I'm leaning towards giving it the 5. I think there's some of the cover characteristics on it are pushing it a little bit further down, 4.5 to 4. But generally the overall condition of the book is really good, and it's just a few flaws that are on the cover that are degrading it, including the staining and the rough spine, especially in the upper left corner. So I'm giving this a solid 5, and I'm real happy about that. Now, if you remember at the beginning of the show, we asked if these are going to be affordable. These 12-cent comics, they get pretty crazy in price, and man, they're putting them in those plastic cases, and those prices are going insane. Is this something you can afford even at the 5.0 that we got right here? Well, you'll be interested to know that this comic itself, this Al Williamson masterpiece, is about $10 in Overstreet, which is actually lower than a lot of other comics around the same time. And if you were to get a 9.2, you'd be looking at about $65. That's a really perfect copy, about $65, which is a little on the pricey side. This is also one of those ones that you have to be careful of, like when you go to a show, this is one of those comics that has a tendency to be looked at and overpriced because people will assume it's worth more than it is. That's why it's a good idea to kind of check the pricing and make sure that you're not overpaying for an issue like this, because this is a perfectly affordable issue. And if you're a Flash Gordon fan, it's an awesome addition to any collection. Do a real quick online check of what you can find. And again, I always do fairly recent finished sales. So these are actually official sales. And I don't represent the condition of any of these online. This is just kind of give you an idea of the pricing. But interestingly, this particular set here of 8 issues went for $35, which actually is probably a really, really good price. He breaks it down into individual issues here, and the quality of the pictures isn't very good. But roughly from what you can kind of look at from the picture, it's not too much different than what we have here. So $35. But a second one, again, another fantastic price on eBay. This set sold for $750. Now, there are 2 copies of issue number 5, which we just looked at, but just kind of taking a quick look at them, they're pretty clean. I mean, this particular copy right here is definitely cleaner than one we got. So if we use it as a standard, we might be able to guess that even that issue might be closer to like a 6 or maybe even better. But just all the kind of rules that we follow, that one issue right there is clearly worth $750. All right, so you've made it this long. I'm going to give you the pick of the day, the secret stash that you got to look for in the comic book shop that you shouldn't get. You should be able to find at a great deal and should find fairly affordable. So this is the Marvel comic series. It's a 2-issue series, and it was done by Al Williamson. Except this series was released in 1995, so it's one of the later works of Al Williamson. But if you look through the issues, the art is still fantastic. And in fact, it's better than anything he did earlier, I believe. So you should be able to find these issues relatively cheap. They're not expensive, and they were plentiful, and they're not super popular, but they're totally worth owning. So next episode, we're going to head back to Marvel Comics and get back more into common things. And again, kind of look at this issue of affordability and what can we get. So this is the next issue we're going to talk about is a Fantastic Four issue by Jack Kirby. It is Fantastic Four number 81, and it's got a lot of interesting stuff going on about it, and we've got a decent copy of it. And after that, we're going to slip a little bit more into independent comics, the Afterlife with Archie series, which completely changed the way you look at the Archie universe. So that's coming up as well. Thank you for joining us at More Fun Comics. If you would subscribe and like and notify and press all those buttons, look for us in the future. We're going to try a few new things, and we're also looking forward to bringing you not just comics, the older comics, but we're also going to bring a lot more of the newer stuff in the current comics that are out right now. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again next time.